There are things that happen to a person that do not arrive with the right name. Not in any language she had grown up speaking. Not in the long silences between one life ending and the next one beginning without her permission. What happened to Mara in the east wing of Fenwick's house on the night of the winter gathering did not have a name. Not one she was given. Not one she would have chosen. She had been sent upstairs. That was the whole of it at the time. Sent upstairs the way things were done in that house. Without explanation. Without the courtesy of preparation. With the particular efficiency of a man who moved people the way he moved furniture. Considering only where they needed to be. Never what it cost them to be moved. She had not known who the man was. Not that night. The night itself was something she had folded very small and placed somewhere she did not open. Not because it was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Because it was the most complicated. Because some of what she felt that night had no business being felt. And she was not ready to examine it. Not then. Not yet. She learned who he was the morning after. From a conversation in the kitchen she was not meant to hear. The kind of conversation that stopped the moment anyone noticed her in the doorway. But she had already heard enough. Kalen Drav. Alphaking of Varric. She had set down the basin she was carrying. Very carefully. The way you set down something breakable when your hands have started to shake and you do not want anyone to see. She walked back upstairs. Sat on the edge of her narrow bed. Looked at the wrong-facing window. Stayed very still for a long time. The Alphaking of Varric. Passing through. Territorial business of some kind. And she had been an arrangement of a different kind. She had not known. He had not known what she was. Neither of them had known what that night would leave behind. It would be 8 weeks before the nausea became something she could not explain away. 8 weeks before she pressed her hand flat against the lower part of her stomach in the dark of the small room and understood what she was carrying. By then the document had already been signed. The price had already been agreed. The carriage was already arranged. She was already property on paper. Being delivered to Varric. To the household of the man who did not know she existed. Carrying something that was half his. That he would not know about. That she had not decided what to do with yet. That was growing in the dark of her without asking permission from either of them. This is not a story about what was done to her. She has had enough of being the thing that things are done to. This is the story of what she did with it. What she built inside herself in the long silences between one life and the next. What it cost to be invisible for long enough that invisibility became its own kind of power. And what happened when the most dangerous man in 2 territories looked up one morning and saw her. Really saw her. For the first time. This is that story. Chapter 1. The room smelled of tallow and finality. Mara had come to recognize certain rooms by what they smelled of. Rooms where men sat behind tables and arranged other people's lives with the specific unhurried focus of those who had done it enough times that the human element no longer required acknowledgement. This was one of those rooms. She stood where she had been told to stand. Slightly to the left of the table. Not at it. The distance was deliberate. Everything in Fenwick's house was deliberate. The distance said you are the subject of this. Not a participant. She had learned to read distances the way other women read expressions. It had kept her safer than expressions ever had. 3 men at the table. Fenwick on the left. She had known him for 6 years. Had mapped him the way you mapped terrain you needed to survive. The expression he wore now was the expression of a man completing something he had been building toward. Not cruelty. Something colder than cruelty. Satisfaction dressed as neutrality. The man on the right was a solicitor. Papers. Quill. The practiced blankness of a man who had processed enough arrangements that each new one required no recalibration. The man in the center she did not know. He was not from here. Everything about him announced it without effort. The cut of his coat. The quality of the leather at his wrists. The particular way he occupied the chair. Not settling into it. Occupying it. Like the chair had been placed there for his use, and he was doing it the courtesy of sitting. Varric. She had heard the word enough in the past weeks to know what it meant when it arrived attached to a person like this. A representative. Sent on behalf of someone who did not come himself. Which told her something about the someone. You did not send a man like this unless the person sending him was significant enough that sending a representative was not a slight. Just the standard distance of operating from a certain altitude. She filed that. Filing was the only form of preparation she had access to. The representative looked at her once. A single clear sweep. The look was not unkind. More the careful neutral assessment of someone confirming the condition of something before signing for it. She looked back at him with the surface she had spent years building. Nothing worth taking. Nothing worth using. Gray dress. Washed hair. Eyes that gave nothing away. You could not stop people looking. You could only decide what they found when they got there. They found nothing. That was the decision. The papers were signed. Fenwick did not look at her face. The solicitor did not look at her face. The representative looked at his copy for a long moment after. Then looked up. The look lasted a beat longer than the transaction required. Something moved through his expression. Too quick to name. Gone before she could file it. He stood. Straightened his coat. Said departure was at dawn. She went back to the small room at the back of the east wing. Stone floor. Wrong-facing window. One hook on the wall where she kept the things she owned. Which were four. A second dress. The shawl her mother had made the winter before she died. A small folded square of paper with something written on it she had never been able to bring herself to read. And the cloth pouch of dried herbs she kept for the nausea. Because the nausea had come first. Before understanding. Before she knew what it meant. The kind of tiredness that lived in the bone and not in the muscle. The kind that sleep said nothing about and rest did not fix. She had known for almost a month. She had told no one. Because telling required trusting someone. And trust in Fenwick's house was a resource she had spent down to nothing a long time ago. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. Placed her hand flat against her lower abdomen. Pressed gently. 11 weeks. Give or take. 11 weeks since the night she had been sent upstairs. 11 weeks since the night she had not known who he was. 11 weeks since something neither of them had planned had taken root in the dark of her and decided to stay. She was being delivered to Varek. To the household of Kalen Drav. The man who did not know she existed. Carrying something that was half his. She pressed her hand a little firmer. Outside the wrong-facing window the light was going. Dawn was coming. She lay down on the narrow bed. Did not sleep. But rested. Because she had learned a long time ago that you met what was coming by preserving what you had. She had very little. She intended to keep it. The carriage was the finest thing she had ever been inside. She noted that without comfort. The quality of the carriage said something about the quality of the destination. And destinations of quality were not always gentle with the things delivered to them. The representative, she had heard one of the guards call him Solt, sat across from her with a document case in his lap. He glanced at her twice in the first hour. She looked out the window both times. The land changed. First trees she recognized. Then open ground. Then the slow shift of the light as the road moved north and the air above the treeline took on the quality of something sharpened by elevation. Colder here. Cleaner. Like the air had been stripped of the soft, uncertain quality of the lowlands and replaced with something more honest. The nausea came in the early afternoon. A wave. Then a settling. She pressed 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist. Breathed through her nose. Waited. Solt looked up from his documents at the change in her breathing. She looked out the window. The nausea passed. He looked back down. But not immediately. She noted the pause. The pause of a man filing something he had not been told to look for. She did not like that pause. They stopped once before the Varek border. A way station. She was allowed to walk. She stood in the thin cold air of the yard and looked at the road ahead disappearing into the treeline. No way back. She had understood that since the document was signed. But standing on the road with the border ahead made it a physical thing rather than a thought. The decision she had made in the first week after she understood settled over her again. She was not arriving empty. She had said that to herself in the dark of the small room, and she was saying it again now. She was not arriving empty. Solt came out of the way station behind her. Stood at a respectful distance. Looked at the same road. Then at her. The look of a man whose professional task was delivering something and who had begun to suspect the something was more complicated than the task description covered. He did not ask whatever the question was. She did not offer him the answer. They got back in the carriage. The border came as the last of the day's light was going. Dark stone markers. old and permanent. The kind of stone that said we existed before you arrived and we will exist after. The carriage was waved through without stopping. She watched the border pass the window. One territory, then another. Inside Varek now. She breathed the colder air in through the gap at the top of the window. And felt something she had not expected. Not hope. She was too careful for hope. More the specific awareness of a person arriving in a place where the rules were not yet declared. Where everything was still unknown. Where anything was still possible. That was not comfort. But it was not nothing. The seat of Varek announced itself before it arrived. The walls first. Dark stone. High and deliberate, and built by people who understood that architecture was a form of communication. These walls said, we have been here longer than the idea of you. Then the gates. Iron and serious. Then the interior. Which was not what she had built in her mind on the road. She had built something matching the walls. Closed. Heavy with the weight of power performing itself. Instead, she found movement. People crossing the courtyards with the particular purposeful energy of those who had somewhere to be and knew the way. Fires burning in iron brackets along the main approach. The smell of food and wood smoke and cold stone. A place that worked. Not a place that performed. She filed that. In the entrance arch a woman. Tall. Gray at the temples. With the posture of someone who had been the most capable person in every room she had ever entered and had long since stopped announcing it. The woman looked at her. Not inventory. Not assessment. The look of someone who had been given information about a situation and was now standing in front of the reality of it and finding the reality required more consideration than the information had prepared her for. Solt spoke to her in a low voice. The woman's eyes stayed on Mara the entire time he spoke. Then Solt stepped back. The woman came forward. Said her name was Finn. Head of the household. Mara would be in her charge. Quarters had been prepared. Time would be given to settle. No cruelty in the delivery. No warmth. The careful neutral management of someone given a complicated situation and handling it with practiced precision. Mara followed her inside. The quarters were small but not punishing. A bed wider than the one she had left. A window that faced light. A basin. A chest. She set her bag down. Looked at the window. Finn was still in the doorway. Said supper would be brought. Said the schedule would be explained in the morning. Then said without preamble and without looking away. The king was aware of her arrival. The king would not require her presence tonight. The king had questions. He would ask them in his own time. In his own way. Mara said she understood. Finn held the look for one more moment. Then left. The door closed. Mara stood in the quiet of the room. Crossed to the window. Looked out at the courtyard below. The fires in their brackets. The figures crossing with purpose. The kingdom working in the dark. She pressed her hand against her stomach. Gently. 11 weeks. In a room in the seat of the man who did not know. In a kingdom that suspected something it had not yet named. She breathed the cold Varek air through the open window. And made herself a promise in the quiet. Whatever came next. She would not be the document again. She would not be the thing on the table. Whatever Varek intended to make of her. She was going to have something to say about it. She did not know how yet. Knowing was where everything started. Chapter 2. She did not see him for 4 days. 4 days of fun and the schedule and the careful geography of the parts of Driven she was permitted to move through. Which were more than she expected. She was not confined. Not watched in the way she had been watched in Fenwick's house. She was given the particular careful neutrality of a household that had been told something about a situation and was navigating the uncertainty of that something with professional discretion. She worked. Because work was the only thing she had ever known how to trust completely. She helped in the kitchen. Not because she was told to. Because she asked. Finn looked at her for a long moment when she asked. Then said yes. The kitchen was warm. The work was familiar. The women there were the kind of women who worked kitchens everywhere. Practical. Occasionally sharp. Possessed of the complete unwritten understanding of the household's interior architecture that no official record would capture. She listened more than she spoke. Learned more than she showed she was learning. She became aware of him before she saw him. On the second day, in the corridor off the east kitchen, the quality of the air changed in the particular way that happened when significant authority moved through a space. The way smaller presences unconsciously adjusted their trajectory. She looked up. Nothing. But the feeling stayed. The sense of something recently there. Something that had passed through the space she was about to enter and moved on before she arrived. On the third day, she was in the kitchen garden when she heard footsteps in the outer corridor beyond the garden gate. They stopped. She kept cutting. The quality of the stillness on the other side of the gate was the quality of someone who had stopped deliberately. After a long moment, the footsteps resumed. Moving away. She stayed in the garden until her hands stopped being aware of themselves. He came around the corner on the fourth morning. She was moving through the corridor off the east kitchen with a covered tray. She came around the junction and walked directly into him. The tray did not fall. She caught it. He steadied her by reflex. One hand at her elbow. Firm and immediate. She looked up. He was taller than the overheard conversations had built him. Broader. Dark hair cropped close. Eyes that landed on her face and did something more complicated than looking. The particular expression of a man who has been carrying a question for 4 days and has just walked directly into the subject of it, and found the subject more complicated than the question. She looked back at him. The surface. Nothing worth taking. Nothing worth using. His hand was still at her elbow. He noticed this at the same moment she did. Dropped it. Stepped back. Created distance. The distance of a man who understood the architecture of power in a space and was choosing not to use it, which was itself a use. She noted that. He looked at the tray, then at her face, then at the corridor behind her. Something moved in his jaw. The controlled adjustment of a man managing something internal with the efficiency of long practice. He said her name. Not a greeting. The specific delivery of a word by someone confirming they have the right information. She said yes. He looked at her for a moment that was longer than the situation required. Shorter than it felt. Then he said he would speak with her. Not this morning. He had matters that required him. But soon. She said she understood. He walked past her down the corridor. Unhurried. The particular pace of someone who had never once needed to use speed to communicate urgency. She stood in the corridor after he had gone. The tray in her hands. Her hand wanting to go to her stomach. She did not let it. Not here. She delivered the tray. Went back to her quarters. And spent the rest of the morning being very precise about her breathing. He found her in the kitchen garden on the 6th morning. She was cutting herbs. The ones she needed. She was on her knees in the cold dirt with a small knife and her sleeves rolled when she heard the gate open. She did not look up immediately. She finished cutting what she was cutting. Set it in the small basket. Then looked up. He was alone. No guard. No solt. No one with papers. Just him. In a dark tunic without the formal layers of the corridor. Standing at the edge of the garden with his hands at his sides and the expression of a man who had been deciding something for 5 days and had made the decision this morning. She waited. He looked at the basket. Then at her face. She watched the calculation happen. Watched the suspicion that had been forming since the corridor click into something more specific. He said she had been unwell on the road. Not a question. An approach. She said the journey was long. He said the journey was almost 2 weeks ago. She said something settled slowly. He looked at the basket again. She knew what was in the basket. He had now seen what was in the basket. They were both standing in a kitchen garden in the early morning knowing the same thing. Neither of them had said it. He looked at her directly. The look that did not reach for softness to make itself easier. He said he was going to ask her something. He said he wanted the honest answer. He said he understood the context in which she had arrived here made honest answers complicated. He was asking anyway. He said, "How long?" 2 words. She understood exactly. The surface held for one more moment. Then she set it down. Not all of it. Just enough. She said 12 weeks. The garden was very quiet. A crow somewhere above the wall. The cold between them. He looked at her for a long time. She let him look. Because there was nothing to hide in her face right now. Just the truth of it. 12 weeks. His. Growing in the dark of her without either of their permissions. He looked away. At the garden wall. At the pale sky above it. At something that was not her and not the basket. The jaw doing the thing it had done in the corridor. Then he looked back. And said nothing for a moment that became its own kind of statement. Then he said the current arrangement was ending. She said she did not understand. He said the arrangement under which she had been brought to Varric. That arrangement was finished. She said she was not property. He said no. She was not. He said the man who had signed that document would be hearing from him. She said it would not change what had already happened. He said no. It would not. He said he was not offering it as a correction. He was offering it as a statement of what was true. She was not property. The fact that she had been treated as such was something he intended to address. She looked at him, standing in her kitchen garden in a plain dark tunic. Hands at his sides. Jaw set. Eyes on her face with the directness of someone who did not soften the delivery of things he meant. And felt something she had no name for. Not safety. She was not naive enough for safety. Not yet. Something adjacent to it. The specific sensation of standing on ground that might hold. Might. She was not certain. She was not going to be certain for a long time. But might was more than she had carried out of Fenwick's house. He said Finn would move her to better quarters today. Said she should have access to the household physician. Said she should eat properly. Said if she needed anything she should tell Finn. He turned to go. At the garden gate he stopped. Did not turn around. Said her name. That same specific delivery. She said yes. He said he was not going to pretend this was uncomplicated. He said he was not going to pretend he knew the shape of what came next. He said he was going to take it one day at a time, and he hoped she could do the same. She said she had been taking things one day at a time for as long as she could remember. A pause. Long enough to have a quality. Then something happened at the edge of his jaw. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. The specific movement of a man who had not expected to find something capable of doing that to his face in a kitchen garden before the yard had properly woken up. He walked through the gate. The latch clicked behind him. She stayed in the garden. 12 weeks. In his territory now. Not property. As something that did not have a name yet. Something that did not have a name yet was still something. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Gently. The way she had learned. She would figure out the name. One day at a time. Chapter 3. Weeks passed the way weeks do when you are watching them carefully. She counted them. Not out of fear anymore. Out of the specific attention of someone who had learned that time was a resource and that resources deserve to be tracked. 14 weeks. 15. The nausea eased. Dara, the physician, small and precise, with the economy of movement of someone who had stripped everything unnecessary from her process, had said it would. She had been right. The first time Dara had examined her, she had not asked who the father was. Had not asked how it had happened. Had not looked at Mara with the specific expression Mara had been bracing for. The expression that said, now we must have a difficult conversation about difficult choices. Dara did not have that expression. Dara had the expression of a woman doing her work. Mara had found she could not look at her directly for the first few minutes. Because kindness delivered without condition was something she had learned not to trust the first time. It usually wanted something. It usually had a shape she would only see after. Before Mara left that first appointment, Dara had said one more thing. She had said whatever had brought her to Varric and whatever the arrangement had been before she arrived. In this room she was a person. Not a situation. Mara had stood in the corridor after and pressed her hand against the cold stone wall. In this room she was a person. She had not been told that in such a direct way before. The quiet of Dreven settled around her in a way she had not expected. Not comfort. Something more cautious than comfort. The specific careful accumulation of small evidence that a place was what it appeared to be. She had not trusted quickly since she was very young. She did not start now. But she collected. Filed. Built the picture from the pieces. Finn, who had looked at her with that complicated expression on the first night and had not simplified it since. Who had stopped watching her with the look that said, I am waiting for you to do the thing I expect you to do. Who had started watching her with the look that said, I am updating what I expected. The kitchen women who had absorbed her into the rhythm of the work without discussion. Who had begun to include her in the conversation that lived around the edges of work. Small things. The kind only shared with someone considered part of the room. She noted each one. He came to the kitchen garden twice more. Not announced. Just him. The first time he asked how she was. She said well. He looked at her the way he looked at everything she said. With the specific attention of a man who had decided to take her at her word and was also tracking the gap between what the words said and what the face said. She had a good face. She had spent years building it. But he was not an ordinary reader of faces. He was a man who had spent his life in a position where everyone around him had reasons to show him something other than what was true. He had learned to read the gap. She noted that he noticed it without commenting on it. He did not push. He said if she needed anything she could come to him directly. Not through Finn. Not through Solt. Directly. She looked at him. He looked back. The gap between what that meant and what either of them was ready to say about what it meant was very wide. Neither of them crossed it. He left. The second time he came to the garden, he sat on the low wall at the garden's edge while she worked. Said nothing for a long time. She continued working. The silence was not uncomfortable, which itself was something she filed. Silences in Fenwick's house had always carried pressure. The specific tension of someone using the absence of words to communicate something they wanted her to feel. This silence did not do that. This silence was just two people in a garden in the early morning, each with their own thoughts, neither requiring the other to perform. After a while he said she did not have to stay in the kitchen. She looked up from the herbs. He said there were other positions in the household if she wanted them. Things that used other skills. If she had them. She said she would think about it. She had been thinking about it since the first week. She had noticed the correspondence left unmanaged on the household table. The particular inefficiency in the way Dreven communicated with the outer territories. The 3 separate occasions she had seen Solt handling something that could have been handled by someone 3 levels below him if the system had been properly organized. She had not said those things. Not yet. She had waited. Because she had learned that arriving somewhere and immediately showing what you could see was not always the safest thing. Sometimes you let the place settle around you first. You let it reveal itself. Then you revealed yourself. He said he would speak to Finn. Left. She stayed in the garden after the gate closed. 16 weeks. She had felt the child move for the first time 3 days ago. In the early morning before the yard woke. A flutter. Brief and unmistakable. She had sat very still for a long time after. Hand pressed flat against the place where she had felt it. Waiting to feel it again. It did not come again that morning. But she knew now differently than she had known before. Not just that it was there. But that it was present. That it was its own thing. Inside her but not only hers. Half his. Moving in the dark. Already becoming something neither of them had named yet. She started working in the correspondence room at the end of the 16th week. Not with a title. Not officially. Finn had simply begun routing certain things through her. The particular quiet expansion of a task she had demonstrated she could do. She rebuilt the outer correspondence system from the first layer. It took 3 weeks. When she was done, Solt had come to stand in the doorway of the correspondence room and looked at what she had done and said nothing for a long moment. Then said it was the most efficiently the outer territories had been managed in 3 years. She had said she had noticed some things. He had looked at her the way the representative's pause in the carriage had looked. The look of a man updating what he expected. He had gone away and she had gone back to work. On a gray morning in the 17th week, a man arrived at the main gate with Fenwick's seal. Finn came to find her. She set down the correspondence she was reviewing. Looked at the window. Said she would come. The man was young. The studied ease of someone performing confidence they did not quite have. He looked at her when she entered the outer hall. He had expected the gray dress. The surface without anything underneath it. She was wearing the Varek household colors. She had her correspondence in her hand. She looked back at him. Nothing worth taking. Nothing worth using. He handed her the letter without greeting her by name. She read it. Then read it again. The letter said Lord Fenwick wished to communicate that the transaction regarding her had included certain conditions not captured in the original document. That she was to be returned upon request. That certain matters had come to his attention regarding her current situation. That a response was expected promptly. She folded the letter, told the man the letter had been received, told him any further correspondence from Lord Fenwick should be directed through official channels, turned and walked back through the corridor. Her hands were steady. She had not expected them to be. She did not go to Finn. She went to the correspondence room, sat down, placed both hands flat on the table, breathed. Fenwick had heard something. Whatever he had heard had been enough for him to reach for the language of conditions not captured in the original document, which was the language of a man who had discovered something valuable he had not known was valuable when he sold it, and wanted it back, or wanted something for it. She sat for a long time, then picked up her quill, and wrote a response. Not to Fenwick. A brief formal note to Finn, attaching the letter, noting what she had told the man in the outer hall, noting that she had thought Finn should know. She sealed it, sent it, went back to work. He came to the correspondence room that afternoon. She heard him before she saw him. He was standing in the doorway with the letter open in one hand. His face was doing the thing it did when he was managing something that required management. He came in, closed the door, set the letter on the table in front of her. He said Fenwick would not be sending anyone else. She said she understood. He said the claims about conditions not in the original document were not legally supportable. Soult had confirmed this. She said she understood. He said there was something else. He had obtained a copy of the original document. He had read it. All of it. The silence that followed had a particular quality. The quality of something that had been in the space between them since the kitchen garden and had just been named without being named. She said she knew what the document said. He said he knew she knew. He said he wanted her to know that he had read it. That he had read every word. That he knew what it was, and what it meant, and what had been done. She said it would not be undone by reading it. He said no, it would not. He said he was not offering reading it as something that fixed anything. He was offering it as a statement of what was true. He knew what had been done. He was not going to behave as though he did not. She looked at the letter on the table, then at him. He was watching her with the specific patience of a man who had learned that some things could not be pushed toward. That some things required the space to arrive in their own time. She said there was something he should know. He waited. She said she had not known who he was. On the night in Fenwick's house. She had not known. She said it clearly. Without apology. Without the performance of apology. As a fact she needed him to have. He held her gaze. Said he knew. Said he had known she did not know from the moment he understood what had happened. Said it was something he had been sitting with since before she arrived in Barrack. Not just what had been done to her, but the specific moment he had understood what was happening, and what he had and had not done about it. She looked at him. Something she had been holding very carefully for 17 weeks shifted. Just slightly. Not released. Just shifted. She said she had not told him because she did not know what telling him would mean. What he would do with it. What it would change. He said he understood that. He said he was still working out what it meant himself. He was going to keep working it out one day at a time. And he hoped she would let him. She said she would let him. He nodded. Then looked at the correspondence on the table. Said he had heard she had found several inefficiencies in the household communication system. She said she had noticed a few things. He said Soult had described it as a complete structural failure that she had rebuilt from the ground. She said Soult was not inaccurate. Something moved at the edge of his jaw. He set a second document on the table next to the letter. She looked at it. A position. With a title and a function and the specific kind of authority that would make the things she was already doing possible to do properly. She looked at the two documents side by side. One that had made her property. One that was making her something else entirely. She said she would need access to the outer correspondence files. He said done. She said she would also need to speak directly with the border territory representatives without routing through Soult. He said done. She looked at him. He looked back. 17 weeks. Something growing in the dark of her that did not have a name yet. Something building in the space between them that also did not have a name yet. Two things. Both becoming. One day at a time. She set the document down. Picked up her quill. Went back to work. He stayed in the correspondence room for a little while after. Said nothing. Read nothing. Just stayed. She did not ask why. She already knew. Some things did not need the right name yet. They just needed the space to arrive in. Chapter 4. 20 weeks. 21. The child growing in the dark of her was no longer a flutter. It was a presence. Deliberate and communicative in the way of something that had developed opinions about position and timing and the particular quality of the food she ate, and was prepared to make those opinions known. She had started talking to it. Not out loud. The interior conversation of someone who had been carrying something long enough that the carrying had developed its own language. He had taken to appearing in the correspondence room with some regularity. Not with tasks. Not with questions about the work. Just appearing. Occupying the chair at the other end of the table with whatever he was working on. She had stopped noting it as a separate event. It had simply become part of the day. On a Tuesday afternoon in the 22nd week, he set down what he was working on and said there was something he wanted to ask her. She looked up. He said it carefully. The way he said things that mattered. With the specific deliberateness of someone who had learned that how something was said was part of what it said. He said he wanted to know what she wanted. Not what she needed. Not what was required. What she wanted. She looked at him. He said he understood she had not been given much opportunity to want things for herself. He was giving her the opportunity now. If she knew what she wanted, she should say it. If she did not know yet, she did not have to say anything. But he wanted her to know the opportunity was there. She looked at him for a long moment. The surface was still there. She was not sure it would ever be entirely gone. It was too old. Too built. But it was thinner than it had ever been. And behind it, something she had not let herself examine directly since she arrived. She said she wanted to stay. He looked at her. She said she wanted to stay in Varrock. She wanted the position. She wanted the work. She wanted to finish what she had started with the border territories. She wanted the south-facing window. She paused. Said she did not know yet what she wanted beyond that. But she knew that much. He held her gaze. Said those things were already hers. She said she knew that. She wanted him to hear her choose them anyway. The correspondence room was very quiet for a moment. Then he said he heard her. She nodded. Looked back at her work. He stayed at the other end of the table. The day continued. The work continued. 22 weeks. One day at a time. The child came in the deep of winter. Dara had said it would be winter. She had been right about most things. The labor was long. Not dangerous. Just the specific long work of a body doing the largest thing a body can do. She did not ask him to be there. He was there. She did not look at him for most of it. When she did, he was sitting in the chair beside the window. Not performing worry. Just present. The particular deliberate presence of a man who had decided that being there was the thing he could give. And gave it completely. When it was difficult, he did not make it about himself. When she needed something, he had it provided before she finished asking. When she needed silence, he gave her silence. When she needed someone to hold her hand in the particular way of someone who understood that holding was not the same as gripping, he held her hand that way. The child arrived in the hour before dawn. Small. Loud in the way that announced itself as deeply unwilling to have been interrupted. Dara placed the child in her arms. She looked at the face. Looked for a long time. The dark hair was his. The shape of the jaw was hers. The eyes she could not read yet. They would tell her eventually. She was good at waiting. She looked up. He was standing now. At the edge of the room. The jaw doing the thing it did when he was managing something that required management. Except this time it was not the only thing moving. His eyes were doing something she had not seen them do before. She had been cataloging his expressions for months. She did not have a file for this one. She said, "Come and see." He crossed the room. Stood beside her. Looked at the child. Looked for a long time. Then looked at her. She looked back. The surface was not there. She had set it down. She was not sure exactly when. Somewhere between the kitchen garden and the correspondence room and the months of one day at a time. She had set it down and had not picked it back up. And the thing underneath it, the thing that had been growing in the dark alongside everything else, was just there. Present. Warm. Entirely hers. He reached out. Very carefully. The way he reached for things that mattered. With the specific deliberateness of someone who understood that how you reached said something about what you believed about the thing you were reaching for. He touched the child's hand. The child's hand closed around one of his fingers. The grip of something that had opinions and was prepared to act on them. He looked at the hand around his finger for a long moment. Then at her. His face was doing the thing she had no file for. She let it do it. She had a long time to build the file. The dawn came through the south-facing window. Slow and certain. She was in the chair beside the window with the child in her arms when he came back. He had left briefly. She had heard him in the corridor giving quiet instructions to someone. The particular tone he used when he wanted something done, and wanted it done without discussion. He came back and sat on the edge of the bed. Not too close. Not the performed distance of two people being careful. Just the natural distance of someone settling into a space thoughtfully. He looked at the child. Said he had thoughts about a name. She said she had thoughts about a name too. He said he was sure she had better thoughts than his. She said she did not know about better. But she had a name she had been considering. He said she should tell him. She said it. He looked at her. Then at the child. Then at her again. Said it was a good name. She said she thought so. He said there was something he wanted to say. She waited. He said he understood this was not what either of them would have chosen. He said he understood she had not had the choice taken from her once. She had had it taken many times. In many ways. By many different people and situations. He said he was not going to be another thing that happened to her without her permission. He said if she wanted to leave Varek when she was well enough he would make that possible. Resources. A position somewhere else if she wanted one. Anything she needed. He said if she wanted to stay he wanted her to stay. Not because of the child. Not because of the document that had been replaced by another document. Because she had rebuilt the outer communication system, and because she could read a room better than anyone he had ever had in his household, and because of the specific silence they had shared at the window, and because of the kitchen garden and the herb basket and the 12 weeks and the 17 weeks and the 22 weeks, and because of every morning he had come to the correspondence room without a task and stayed without a reason. He said he was saying it directly because he had learned she trusted direct. He said he hoped she would tell him directly in return. She looked at him. The child in her arms making the small sounds of something deciding what it thought about the world. She said she had already told him what she wanted. In the correspondence room. She wanted to stay. She had wanted him to hear her choose it. He said he remembered. She said she was still choosing it. He looked at her. Then at the child. Then out the south-facing window at the dawn coming through. He said he was glad. She said she knew. He said how. She said because she had been paying attention. The suggestion of something at the edge of his jaw. The particular movement she had learned. He said she noticed everything. She said it was how she had survived. He said it was more than that now. She looked at him. He looked back. She said there was something she wanted to tell him. He waited. She said she had not known who he was on the night in Fenwick's house. He said he knew. She said she knew he knew. She said she wanted to tell him something about that night anyway. He looked at her. She said she had been afraid. She had been afraid of most things for most of her life. It was the condition she had learned to operate inside. Fear as the default atmosphere. She said, but there had been a moment on that night. Before she understood what it would leave behind. Before she knew who he was. There had been a moment where she had felt something she had not felt before. Not safety. She had not known enough of safety to recognize it. Something else. The specific feeling of being in a room with someone who was looking at her. Actually looking. Not at the gray dress. Not at the surface. At her. She said she had not known what to do with that. Had decided it was not real. Had filed it under things that did not have a name yet and left it there. She was telling him now because she had promised herself she would not be invisible in this place. She was not going to perform not being invisible. She was going to actually not be. And that meant saying the things that did not have names yet. Even when they were difficult to say. He was very still. Then he said there was something about that night he had not told her. She waited. He said he had not been passing through Fenwick's territory on diplomatic business. He had been there specifically. There had been reports from the South Territories for months about certain practices in certain households. Practices that Fenwick's house had been named in. He had gone himself because he did not trust someone else to go. He said he had not known what had been arranged for that night until it was already arranged. He said by the time he understood he had not handled it well. He said that was the thing he had been sitting with since before she arrived in Varric. Not just what had been done to her, but the specific moment he had understood what was happening, and what he had and had not done about it. She looked at him. He looked back. Not the managed expression. Not the jaw doing the work of containing something. Just his face. The actual one underneath the management. She said it was complicated. He said yes. She said she was not ready to talk about all of it. He said he understood. She said she was telling him that so he knew she intended to talk about it eventually. Just not yet. He said that was enough. The child made a sound. They both looked at him. The dawn was fully through the window now. The yard below beginning its morning. The kingdom working. Not performing. She looked at the light. Said one more thing. Said she was glad it was him. She felt him go still. Said she had not known who he was on that night. But she was glad it was him. That what was growing in her had been half his. That the man in the kitchen garden and the correspondence room and the chair beside the window was the one. He said nothing for a long moment. Then said he was glad too. Said it with the specific directness he used when he meant something completely. She looked at the child. Pressed her hand to the small warm weight of him. He had dark hair. He had a name now. He had a south-facing window and a mother who had been told she was not a situation and a father who was learning to give space to things that needed space to arrive. That was a good beginning. That was more than enough. That was everything. One day at a time.